Have you ever had something go really wrong in flight? It can happen, and it did happen to me a little while ago in the Bonanza when my landing gear was stuck in the up position and I could not extend it with the normal procedure and also not with the emergency procedure. As pilots, how we react in such difficult situations probably has a bigger impact on the outcome than the severity of the issue itself. The panel discussion you're about to see was recorded at the convention of the American Bonanza Society in 2025. But what you will hear and learn does not just apply to Bonanzas or the problems with the landing gear. I know it's a long video, but I really encourage you to watch it sometime when you have an hour to spare. You will be a step or two closer to a good outcome should you ever find yourself in an in-flight emergency. And now, let's go to Wichita, Kansas and join the panel.
Okay, we've got three great speakers up here today. We've got Doug Rozendaal, who's a 10,000-hour ATP CFI, CFII, MEI, and DPE. He owns a B-55 and 4 other airplanes. I don't know what else you do but fly airplanes. He's a former freight dog and warbird pilot, and all makes and models of single-engine, multi-engine, piston, some jet type ratings as well. And also you might have seen him do some aerobatics in multiple types of aerobatic airplanes. He's flown over 250 different types of airplanes. Whew. We've got Martin Pauly also here. Many of you may know as he's also a strategist for an avionics company in Cedar Rapids. He moonlights as a CFII and an ABS flight instructor, and of course many of you may see his flying adventures on his popular YouTube channel. We also have Shane Vande, owns an FBO flight school and shop in Pella, Iowa. He flies everything from Cubs to jets and also an active instructor and DPE. So welcome. Thank you very much. I'll turn it over to the speakers.
Thank you, Susan. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Are we all having fun? Good. Well, welcome to this panel with Doug, Shane, and myself, Martin here. Thanks for the introduction, Susan. We're going to talk today about an issue that I had the pleasure of experiencing back in May on a post-maintenance flight. You know, it really had nothing to do with the maintenance activity. It just happened to be in Shane's shop, and
you heard that, right? And so keep that in mind.
Nothing to do with the work being done at the shop, and you'll understand why here in a moment. Shane and Doug both played a big role in the outcome of this event, and that's why we thought it would be good to talk about this. Talk about not just what happened. We'll start with that. You know, what did I see in the cockpit, and then we'll complement that with what actually happened on the mechanical side. But most importantly, there are some human factors aspects that we can all take away here that may be helpful in situations like this. Single pilot resource management, etc. So we'll talk quite a bit about that, and of course we'll have time for questions when we're done here. So let's start with what actually happened here. This was a flight right after the installation of a SureFly mag in my A36. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to quantify the difference in terms of performance and engine temperatures between that mag being configured for standard timing and advanced timing. That's an option I didn't have before, and everybody knows sort of a little bit more performance, somewhat higher temperatures in the engine, but I wanted to fly the same profile twice on the same day and capture some data for it, and then compare and be able to quantify the difference. So that profile took me to 11,500 feet, and then I landed back in Pella, and to reconfigure the mag. At least that was the plan. Well, here's what happened when I lowered the gear. What do you notice? No lights, yeah. And the breakers popped. So the switch is down, no lights, breakers popped. That's not good. But it didn't alarm me at all, because I had been in that situation once before, a few years back. I had a gear motor failure. So I did the same thing I did back then. I turned the autopilot on. I was still high enough to be in smooth air. I flew a holding pattern over the Pella airport and got the POH out with the landing gear manual extension checklist. And I followed it. And if you fly Bonanzas or Barons, you all know the drill, right? You slow down a little bit. Breaker was already popped, so I didn't have to do that. The handle was already down, so it was really just following the checklist, a matter of getting the crank cover off, unfolding the crank, engaging the crank, and then 50 turns counterclockwise in that awkward position right behind me. Except I couldn't move the crank. So now what? I was looking at the POH checklist, right? Maybe there's a next page that tells me what to do when you can't move the crank, and there isn't. And it's a pretty sobering feeling when you realize that this is a situation that isn't covered anywhere. Fortunately, even though I was alone in the cockpit, right, I still had a radio. So I called the Unicom. I was on the CTAP the whole time, really. I called the Unicom and got Shane on the other end. And Shane is a former Bonanza owner, S model, right? Yep. So you know the gear system very well. And Shane asked a few questions, but very quickly understood the severity of the situation, and that this wasn't a simple matter of guiding me to the right page and the right document and unlocking it. And
yeah, so Martin calls on the Unicom frequency 122.8 in Iowa and says, "Hey, I've got a problem with the airplane you just worked on." And so my first response is, how about we go to a discrete frequency now that damage is done. But the discrete frequency is a benefit, something you may not think about, but you got everybody, and of course then everybody who was on 122.8 also went to that discrete frequency to hear the action. The other thing is, you start thinking, right? So we just swiped his credit card for a big bill. There's very few coincidences in aviation, so what did we do, right? So, and just remember, if you take nothing else away, it wasn't my fault, Martin said. So the first thing I told him to do is turn that SureFly mag off, go to a single mag. And by now the shop is up, they're watching me talk on the radio, and they all turned against me. We didn't do anything wrong. It's like, okay, but I'm gonna pay for this. So, eliminate the coincidences, right, is where we started. But yes, the radio being a huge start to this ADM and CRM process.
Yeah, so we tried disabling the mag, and that didn't make any difference, as you can imagine. And then Shane had a good idea. He asked me, would you like me to call ABS and see if we can get one of the tech advisors on the phone? And I hadn't thought about it, so it was a good idea, and maybe you can talk about that conversation a little bit.
Yeah, so and again, this is kind of a fork in the road, right? So now we're all in this together. And
how much fuel do you have on board at this point?
I had plenty of fuel. It was almost full when I started. I had probably 3.5 to 4 hours of fuel left.
And Martin communicated that, and the urge to get it solved, of course, you'll hear throughout this. It's like, you just want to fix this, right? Not enough emphasis probably on how much time we had, but I can't emphasize enough. We're a service center for Cirrus aircraft. We worked on Bonanzas. I've worked on and flown Bonanzas since I was in high school. My S model was owned by my uncle. I grew up in the back of it. I can't emphasize how beneficial it is to have ABS and what value you get out of it. Immediately I called, and obviously we have a great relationship with Cirrus. We have good contacts there, but on a new manufacturer airplane, we would have burned a lot more fuel waiting to get to the right person. Immediately called the hotline, explained the situation, and I was given my choice of names. I grabbed the one I recognized. In the meantime, Doug Cash, one of our other mechanics who's a Baron owner, has been to the ABS Academy. He called the cell phone of Curtis, who was his instructor, Curtis Boulware. And so we had 2 of the lead ABS tech reps working for us right away. So really good support, and now we've expanded our network. So you think, the solitude of flying an airplane alone, it doesn't take much to open that up to a big crew who's all working for a good outcome here. So.
In parallel, Shane's wife Megan contacted via text message Doug Rozendaal. Doug is a Baron owner and a good friend, and the hope was that maybe he can help. And then I got this text message from Doug.
So I was in Wilmington, Delaware, sitting in a hotel room watching it rain because I was out flying Doc, the B-29, giving rides, and obviously we weren't giving rides in the rain, and I'm sitting amongst all of our crew, and we're just killing time. We'd been sitting there that was the second day. We'd been sitting on the ground waiting for the rain to subside. And Megan didn't call looking for tech support. Megan called just because she knew that I would want to know that Martin was in a little bit of a jam. And I said to the crew that was sitting there, I said, well, my buddy's getting ready to put his beautiful A36 on its belly. And everybody kind of goes, wow. And there's a lot of merit in being at, as Shane, we were talking about this, 0 airspeed, 0 AGL. Okay, your mind works a lot better at 0 airspeed, 0 AGL. And so if you want to put up the next text that I sent, I'm a little humor, levity doesn't hurt. I forgot about that slide. Now the next one.
Let me. We'll go there in a second. Before we go to that next one, so we tried a lot of things. Everyone was in agreement, I believe, including the tech advisors, that something had gotten jammed up with the sector gear, and if only I was able to move the crank maybe a quarter turn even, then I would get out of that jam. And we discussed the possibility of using something for leverage, but I didn't have anything that I could reach to use it. So long story short, I made the decision to land gear up. I called Shane again on the radio and asked him to reach out for an ambulance and a fire truck just in case. Not that I thought it was needed, but never look stupid in an NTSB report. So if anything, worst case scenario, I wanted all the T's crossed and all the I's dotted. And about 20 minutes later, Shane said, we're ready. So I started the descent, and in the descent, I feel my phone vibrate in my pocket, and it's this next text message from Doug.
So, I'm a farm kid. I grew up on a farm in central Iowa, and I'm a gearhead. And Martin and I did a video on his channel called How It Works versus How to Work It. And I firmly believe, and sadly, when I was in junior high, you had to take apart a 3-horse Briggs and Stratton, put it back together and pull the string, and it had to start. And if it didn't start, you had to do it over again. And today, there are, 90% of the people on the road do not understand how their car works. All right? And it used to be, I fly World War II airplanes, a lot of them, and when those airplanes were built, the ground school, they taught you, the joke was they taught you how to build the airplane, okay? Today, we teach you how to work the airplane, because I would argue it's not possible for any single human being to understand all the iterations of a sensor failure in an Airbus. It's just not possible. And so as a result of that, we have a QRH that's this thick. And so what I teach is fly the airplane, read the checklist. Get away from the ground, get away from the crowd, and read the checklist. And if you're in an Airbus in the QRH and you get to the bottom of the QRH, it's going to be a bad day. And Martin was having a bad day because he was at the end of the QRH in the Bonanza, which is, 4 pages, not a lot. And it didn't work, and so he was fixing to have a bad day. Well, again, back to World War II, without the big QRHs, you had to understand how the machinery works and figure out what was wrong, how important it was, is it a big problem or a little problem, respond appropriately, and figure out what to do. And so immediately, here I am, 0 altitude, 0 airspeed, sitting in the rain in Wilmington, Delaware, and I start going on my mind, what's going on? So if you... I think there's a text before that, didn't there, where I said, I believe your gear ran past the limit switch, jammed in the up position, and then I sent this text, have you tried selecting down and then putting pressure on the crank and push the circuit breaker in, so you're helping the motor. And when you're sending a text message, you should send the whole message in one text message, because then what happened, Martin? That's the second text message.
And I didn't read that second message before. I was in this really awkward position with one hand behind me and the other hand reaching for the circuit breaker. And fortunately what happened is, of course, I know about the danger of having the crank engaged when the motor runs, right? We all learn about that. I drew a blank at that moment. I did not think about it until later when I saw this. But fortunately, as you can see, I have all my 5 fingers attached. Fortunately, when I was leaning, not really reaching for the crank, but putting as much weight as I could on that handle to force it down counterclockwise while pushing the circuit breaker in, and it did the job. The motor started running, and as the crank moved, my body fell backwards away from the spinning handle. So I was very fortunate twice there. Once it worked, and 2, I didn't get injured in the process. And yeah, so Doug, that did it. Great news, and good outcome. And of course, Doug is not just very savvy with technical things, but he's also a very business savvy. So his next text was this. And
so I'm sitting here in this hotel, pondering my friend putting his beautiful airplane on the belly. And if you know Martin, it's his lifeblood, it's his YouTube channel, it's all of that. And anybody that's had an airplane on the belly, and unfortunately I haven't, knows that can be a year-long process. And I got to tell you, I'm sitting here with a bunch of these people, and I was emotional. It was really overwhelming, and there's a lot to, and what we're here to talk about today is what we can learn from this particular, we're not here to discuss the technical aspects of why it happened, whether it was overrunning the limit switch, whether it was a failure of the dynamic brake was broken. We can talk about, that's not what we're here to talk about, okay? That's for the mechanics. What we're here to talk about is what can we learn from this, and the attitude it takes, the never give up that it takes to deal with and utilizing all your resources at a time like this.
Yeah, and we will talk about the mechanical side a little bit. We got some pictures of different components, and Shane, you're probably the most qualified of the three of us here to talk about those.
All right, so how many of you have seen inside a beach gearbox? How many of you have paid for the insides of a beach gearbox? Yeah. This is the bottom cover.
Not one of Walter's greater inventions, I might add.
So the bottom cover of the gear actuator, on the Beach Bonanza, same as the Baron. Lots of changes over the years, but same basic design. So again, Doug's hypothesis that it ran too far for whatever reason is correct. And you can see where my lucky flying pin is pointing there is the stop. And you can see the gear is supposed to be electrically stopped, the sector gear, before it hits that. And you can see it hit it, overran it, wedged up on top of it. So absolutely that's what happened. It's mechanically bound. It's not designed to work that way. So next slide is the sector gear itself. Actually, if you go, is the red crack? Go back a couple. So you can see at the bottom of that one, that red area, it hit with so much force it cracked the lower housing of the gear actuator. And when the airplane got in the shop, it was leaking gear oil. That's how wide it opened that. So it was a pretty good smack. And then moving ahead, there's the sector gear. I think that's about $6,000 gear these days, Martin.
Yeah, a little north of there.
Yeah. So
for a serviceable part.
Markup.
Yeah. So whoops, I quoted the wrong price again. So you can see the red part. Yeah, that's why I let the guys handle that. The red part there you can see is the part of the gear that was damaged, which corresponds with how far it went over. And there's the relay. We got to blame somebody there, so we blame the dynamic brake relay. It is possible there was some issue with the rigging of the gear as well, but that relay failed to test at the overhaul facility. That relay electrically stops that gear motor. Obviously, any sort of freewheeling of that actuator could cause that overrun. So not only do we shut off electrical power, we reverse it so it stops it immediately. And you guys are kind of used to hearing all that when the gear operates. So that was the bad component. That's the smoking gun that caused all the other problems. And you can see this shaft that runs vertically through the actuator. You can see how much force there was. It literally twisted that. You can see the twisting in the spline. So it really hit hard. On a 28 volt airplane, it can do that. Side note, that was the earlier thin shaft. I don't know that it would have mattered. It probably wouldn't have distorted as much, but it speaks to when you get a component overhauled, try to get your components back as much as you can. Try to get, because this was actually off an earlier airplane. It was eligible for installation, but his airplane does have now the thicker shaft, which is almost double the wall thickness, a much more stout one. So this was designed for 12 volt airplanes with less torque. So those are the mechanics of what happened. Before we leave the mechanical thing, which Doug is ready to do, just a reminder, you got great resources in my bag over here. I have the landing gear guide. How many of you know your mechanic has that ABS landing gear guide? That thing is just invaluable. And make sure your mechanic has it. Think about ABS Academy for your mechanic, and these things shouldn't happen in a well-maintained gear system.
All right, now we get to the real fun stuff. You know, what can we all take away from this? And
before we leave the mechanicals,
yes.
How many hours were on the gearbox or the overhaul?
Not very many.
Not very many. The gearbox had been overhauled about 3 years prior.
Wow. Was it a white? It looked white, right? It was white gearbox?
That one had, white white coating on the outside of it.
It's like a 2,000 hour gearbox up there.
Yeah, and I think it had, would it have 600 hours or less on it?
Yeah, less than that.
How many hours on the brake relay?
I don't know.
We don't know.
Yeah, so remember the gearbox, in our most plausible explanation that we can come up with, the gearbox was not the cause of the issue, right? It was the relay that controls the dynamic braking, which was confirmed faulty in the shop.
And I don't think there's an overhaul on the relay itself, right? Just the gearbox.
Usually just gets tested, yeah. So we're in the habit of sending that out. Again, owner, looking out for yourself. It's good to have that sent out. We sent this one to, worth mentioning, we sent it to Cruise Air. If you're familiar with them, they really took a lot of time to find out what happened rather than just fix it and answer our questions, and I was really impressed. I've used them for years, but again, impressed with their knowledge of that system.
Was it just a burnt contact inside? Did they tell you what was wrong with it?
Nope, just sold us a new one. It failed, but yeah, I'm not sure. So I've got it, but I haven't had time to dig into it. So.
Yeah. And I will add that as the owner of the plane, I was very, very relieved to hear that they confirmed that the relay was broken, right? Because fixing it and not knowing if we really have the root cause and if it was addressed, right, that means I could be in that same situation again at any point in time. So
Now you know what to do.
now I know what to do, yeah.
And one of the things that I thought about, it could have been that the brake relay had failed a long time ago and the gearbox was repeatedly going too far and finally went far enough that it jammed. Okay, so again, the brake relay could have failed, several hours previous.
Did you consider that maybe the uplocks were stuck, broken? I don't know how they can get stuck, but the uplocks were stuck. Why did you get the same thing?
The question was, did we consider that the uplocks could be stuck? And the answer to that is no. That never crossed my mind.
And the ABS tech guys went right to this problem as well. I think without thinking too much.
If the uplocks would have been stuck, you'd have had some play in the handle. Yeah.
Yeah, you would have had your.
And he said, he said the handle just wouldn't move at all. So that pretty much led us to the gearbox going to some sort of a failure in the gearbox.
Where's that relay located?
Right on the right with the actuator there. Right.
It's under under the pilot seat.
Under the spar cover. Yeah, under the whole thing is under the pilot seat, or under the middle.
That same relay is used on the older King Airs. There's a company called Fleet Support that rebuilds those relays.
Hey Doug, back to that uplock roller, that Zert that's right there by it. I had one with little red covers on it, and I was told never to put that on that Zert. Why? Don't know.
That'd be a shame.
I would guess interference. If it came loose, it could wedge in that uplock roller. Be very unlikely. It would likely fall away. But yeah, you make a good point. A lot of the beaches, a lot of people have the covers, and you never see them on the uplock rollers. And it's a pretty tight tolerance. It's a feeler gauge check, not a piece of plastic check. So that's probably why.
With your autopilot, had you not been in a situation that you could have gotten in touch with them on the radio, with the autopilot, could you have just let the autopilot fly the plane and then get back to where you could handle the
Question is, with my autopilot, could I've moved back out of my seat?
I got a story about
discussed that.
I've got a story about that. A guy I used to fly for, in the last session that I was at, they talked about Buddy Holly. I flew for the guy that owned the airplane that Buddy Holly crashed in. And him and his wife were going somewhere in a 402, and the relief tube in a 402 is back by the cabin door. So he's got the trusty Cessna 400 autopilot on, and anybody that's old enough to have flown with 400 autopilots knows that's a bad idea. But he went to the back to use the relief tube, and as he was moving back, the airplane started pitching up, and his wife started pushing forward on the yoke. And he's in the back doing his business with his pants down, pushing forward on the yoke when the autopilot let go, and she couldn't hold it, and the 402 went vertical. And he described in great laborious detail climbing up the seats to get to the cockpit with his pants off. Anyway, so if you're going to leave the pilot seat in an airplane, you want to do it very slowly so that the trim has time. But you're putting yourself at some risk to do that.
And we talked about that at length, and it's a good reminder too, and we'll talk about it in the CRM, is, you know, not just because it's a suggestion, you're PIC, right? And Martin was really good about thinking about everything that we threw at him and making his decision if he felt comfortable doing it. And I think that was a really good way to handle it. So, you know, you trust people on the ground. If they throw out an oddball idea, you're still the one that's buckled in the seat. You got to make that decision.
Yeah, my concern about this idea was not so much being in the back with my pants down, but it was simply comparing the alternatives, right? Because I knew I could land gear up and walk away from it in all likelihood, right? There was a thought that, you know, as I move back with nobody else in the front seats and the CG is moving backwards with an electric air conditioning in the tail of this A36, so my CG is already farther aft than most A36s. I said, well, what if I get to the back and where the tow bar is, maybe I can use that for leverage. But then the autopilot disconnects and I get in a stall or a spin, right? Will I be able to get back to the front? And comparing the alternatives of a likely gear up landing and walking away from it versus low probability but very high severity outcome of spinning into a burning hole in the ground, I chose to stay in my seat. Yes?
This may be controversial, but I think you were fortunate to be by yourself. I had an experience like this in January. I had another Bonanza pilot in the right seat, and I put the autopilot on, slowed the plane down. Oh no, you're too slow, you're going to stall. I said, no, I need it slow so I can crank it down. I finally had to tell him, it's my airplane, shut up. So I really, and if you look at statistics, if you have another pilot on board, the accident rate goes up. If there's another CFI on board, it goes up even more.
And if it's an airline pilot.
I think the solitude and talking to the ground was probably fortunate.
Yeah, you may be right, yeah.
You have your phone numbers, please?
Yes, maybe direct it to Shane. But a lot of Bonanza pilots use the landing gear as an air braking system. Not that you extend the gear at above the gear extension speed, but a lot of times I fly with people who extend it to get just below the gear extension speed. It's like, okay, let's put the gear down now. Could this failure have been possibly, maybe not caused by, but contributing to numerous landing gear extensions at higher airspeeds? In other words, so I teach my Bonanza students, hey, if you're having to do that, use the landing gear as an air brake system, that means that you did not reduce your power and start slowing up way back behind you. And especially with older airplanes, I said, hey, listen, you really want to be putting this gear down because you need to land, not because you need it as an air brake system. But is this failure possibly caused by putting the gear down at higher airspeeds?
I would think that's unlikely. Everything I've read from ABS and everything else is that most gear damage is misringing, right? If I were better prepared for this question, keep in mind, I think like my S model, if you oversped the airplane, the emergency procedure was to put the gear down regardless of the speed. Therefore, there is an inspection in the manual that the shop should do if that occurs. The pilot tells the shop and they look. And it'd be interesting, if I were smarter I would have looked that up, but it'd be interesting to see what they have you look at, because that would tell you what's stressed. And I know for a fact, if you go back to the original certification Bonanza, the failure of the gear door, you know, speed and gear is almost always stress on gear doors before anything else. And that's what caused the original uplock roller, all that, because of a gear door opening up. So I think the stress would be on gear doors only, and I think I'm with you as teaching stabilized flying. Let's stay away from using the gear as a crutch, but keep it in mind as an emergency procedure. We do see these accidents where spatial disorientation and the airplane comes down in multiple pieces, and speed is the enemy there, right? I need to look. That'll be my weekend project, is looking that up and see what the damage is. On the other hand, if we're talking about overspeed, flaps, we've seen a lot of damage over the years to the flaps due to overspeeding, so especially on the flap side, a cushion is good. But I don't think in this case it likely would be that, but it's a good question. So.
I regularly in flight as well as on the ground check that I have a eighth to a quarter turn free travel, even in the air occasionally. That might have caught that early if this was going on periodically.
You make a good point. So checking that dynamic braking relay, the check for that in the shop is to make sure, first of all, that you have real voltage. Don't run it on battery voltage because it doesn't duplicate what it does in the air. And then you're checking to make sure that you have, I believe it's an eighth to a quarter turn. It may differ on the different systems, but so you release the gear handle, you engage the gear handle and move it in the direction it was going, and you should be able to.
After pulling the circuit breaker.
Well, it depends who you ask, right? Yes, sorry. Don't follow. I need a disclaimer. Don't follow I'm no substitute for the checklist or the manual. But the idea is making sure that the gear stops before its absolute limit. And you're dead on if you were to check that on often. You might catch a problem before it is a problem. The caution, of course, like anything else, is to make sure that you do get it stowed, that you pull the breaker, check it, and that you do get it stowed, everything back, returned to normal before you go. So
I do it 2 or 3 times a year.
Yeah, that's in between.
I'm gonna do it when I get home.
Yeah. And it gives you another. How many of you are in the habit of getting in the airplane and making sure you can get at that handle? Make sure it's not trapped behind a piece of plastic like's been done. So it's one more chance to do that too. So I like that. Properly done, I think that's a good technique.
Somebody had a situation where the spark cover was put on and blocked, and the gear handle was underneath the spark cover after maintenance.
Let's do one more question right now, and then we'll go to the next section.
Sure. Did you get an opportunity to check after the fact when the gear was rigged last to make sure that it was done on external power? Because if it was done on the battery, it could have set the limits, and then when you ran it with the alternator, it could have just gone through the limits and hit the stops.
I did not go back and verify that.
I think the actuator was installed by a reputable shop, and the annual was done by a reputable shop, so we would have expected that, not mine again, but in this case, but we would expect that it would have. But one of my early thoughts, my harebrained thoughts, which Doug said right away, that's probably not right. No, he was right, like he often is, but you had switched alternators. You went to.
Oh yeah, with the air conditioner.
I had gone from a 60 amp to a 100 amp alternator, and I had also just recently installed a backup alternator, so a lot more amps available than before.
And if you look at his engine monitor, he was not only had much more amps available, he was running a half a volt higher than what he was before. And so my theory was, well, maybe that's been caused that issue. So on the old regulators, always try to, for battery boiling over and the gear system, not to crank them too much over 28 or over 14, and try to keep them just on the low side of that. So that was an early theory. I think in this case, the actuator was overhauled by a reputable facility. I don't remember if that relay was tested. I think it was at the time. It was installed by a reputable facility, and the annuals had been done by a knowledgeable beach guy. So it's unlikely, but it's not impossible. Everybody has a bad day, right?
All right, let's move to the last section here about back to the pilot side, and there's a bunch of things we can talk about, but one here is particularly in a landing gear, with the landing gear issue, it's not an emergency, right?
So this was my point, my bullet point. I in the introduction said I'm a DPE. I'm a former DPE. I'd had enough and I quit here about a month ago. But on a check ride, especially an advanced check ride, the question I always asked was, if you have a gear problem, what do you do? And the answer I was always looking for is fly the airplane, read the checklist. Okay, and I've got a long story. There's an AOPA safety with Richard McSpadden that I did about a gear failure, actually not a gear failure, electrical failure at night in the Twin Beach. And I was flying the Twin Beach regularly, freight dog, and I knew that system stone cold had a total electrical failure at night, IMC, 300-foot ceilings for, I think my alternate was Mitchell, South Dakota, which was 250 miles beyond where I was at. And it caused me to need to emergency extend the gear, and I did it from memory instead of reading the checklist. And the first item on the checklist is to pull the circuit breaker, or is to select down on the handle. And the squat switch on a Twin Beach, it just locks the handle. It doesn't do anything else. Fortunately, at the last minute, I decided I'd like to see some green lights. So I had pulled the circuit, I had electrical failure, long story, but I pushed in the circuit breaker. And when I did that, because the handle was up, it tried to retract the gear. And that killed what little bit of remaining battery voltage that I had remaining. And I circled the tower at 200 feet while I cranked the gear down again. And this time with the handle in down position. Had I not done that, the mechanic would have come to get the airplane, gotten the airplane, turned the power on, and the airplane would have hit the ground. So fly the airplane, read the checklist. No matter how well you know it, read the checklist. Because again, as both Martin and Shane alluded, Shane was in an elevated state. I mean, yes, he was sitting on the ground at 0 airspeed, but he was thinking about his airplane, and as he said, all of his customers in central Iowa listening on Unicom. Okay? So that clouds your judgment. I don't care who you are, that impacts how you think. Fly the airplane, read the checklist.
But sometimes that doesn't fix the problem, right? And that was the case here. So if that happens, then well, there's a lot we can talk about. But the most important thing is, even though I was the sole occupant of that airplane, I wasn't really alone, right? Through the radio, I was talking with Shane, who within a few minutes was talking to not one but two of the tech advisors from ABS and the staff in his shop. My cell phone had good enough reception to work with text messages, so we had Doug looped in. And before I even knew it, we had some of the brightest minds and most experienced experts on Bonanzas and the Bonanza gear system thinking about my situation and thinking about how to bring it to a good end. And that was tremendously reassuring, and in the end produced a solution, right? And along those lines, this was not something that required any urgency, right? Earlier we had a question how much fuel I had. At the time that I realized I had a gear issue, I had still at least 3 hours of fuel left. And as much as we may feel the urge to do something quickly, right, impulsivity, that's the wrong approach. Use that time.
So I was coming home in my Taylorcraft from, I've got a L2 Warbird, from an air show event, And I was coming down Interstate 35 south of Minneapolis, and I won't say how low the weather was, but it was low enough that I decided I needed to land halfway, and I'm only 60 miles from home. And just say it was pretty low weather, and so I landed and went in, and the weather came up a little bit, and I won't say how much it came up. It probably wasn't enough, but that's beside the point. And I was taxiing out and getting ready to take off, and this King Air comes out of the clouds to make a low approach at Owatonna or Faribault, I don't remember which, with his gear up, and he makes this low pass and climbs back into the clouds. And I said, King Air at Owatonna or Faribault, what are your intentions? And the guy says, I'm going to go to Rochester and put this thing on the belly. I'm done fooling around with it. I went, wow, that's interesting. So he's gone. I took off and immediately turned to Rochester Approach. And Rochester Approach says, well, we've got some airplanes we'd like to get out. How much fuel do you have? We got some airplanes we'd like to get out of here. What they really wanted to do was get the helicopter from Mayo to the airport. And could you hold for a little bit? And he said, yeah, I can do this. But he said, I really want this airplane on the ground. Okay, well, we'll get these airplanes out right away. The next thing Approach said was, hey, Minneapolis Center's got Beechcraft Engineering on the phone if you'd like to talk to him. Well, I got nothing better to do. Okay, I'll talk to him. He switched frequencies, and from the time he checked down on that frequency until the gear was down was less than a minute. And this guy had been trained and was flying a hydraulic airplane, and he was in a bicycle chain airplane, and he just didn't know about the little toggle, the ratchet clip on the gear handle, and all he had to do was fix that and pump the gear down. It was that close to putting it. So if you've got gas and you've got time and you've got a cell phone, you've got resources, and don't give up until you've exhausted all your resources.
Yeah, the Minneapolis Center reminded me, somebody asked me shortly after, well, did you declare an emergency? And I didn't. In fact, I was not even talking to ATC at all. It was a nice VFR day, beautiful morning. I was on the CTAF of Pella because I was over the airport the whole time, even though I was significantly higher than the traffic pattern. But this was a situation where I don't know what ATC could have possibly done for me that wasn't already happening on the ground, right? They're trained to do a lot of good things and provide assistance in certain emergencies, but that includes priority handling or helping with navigation. I don't think controllers are trained in unjamming a locked sector gear. So no, I did not, and until somebody asked me later, the thought didn't even occur to me. Yes?
Did you think about running out your fuel if you were going to gear belly up to get as much fuel out of the aircraft?
Did I think about using up all my fuel before bellying up?
Not all your fuel.
Well, but yeah. That was, no, I was glad I had fuel so that I was not in a rush to make any decision. But I think we've all seen videos on social media of gear up landings, right? They happen all the time, usually not because of mechanical issues, but because somebody forgot to lower it and didn't think a checklist was important. And nothing ever happens, right? They slide pretty gracefully on the pavement or on the grass, wherever they land. So I was not worried about having a fire and thus too much fuel.
There was a DC-8 out in Portland many years ago that had a landing gear indicator light problem. And they decided to dump their fuel, and they ran out of gas and finally crashed.
That's unfortunate, yeah.
I'm sure most of the people here probably have read this book. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. It's really all about what you're talking, that it's slow down the brain so it has more volume to pull in, like a half empty or a full glass. It's not going to take any more water, but an empty glass will take more water. So empty out your brain, slow it down, and you'll be able to figure things out. So Thinking Fast and Slow. I'd recommend those that haven't read it to do that.
I was in Oshkosh, and we were getting ready to go to Normandy, so we were practicing some formation. I was flying a C-47 and another C-47 that we were flying formation with. We came into the break and he put his gear down and his right gear didn't come down. And I chased this guy and flew behind him for an hour and a half. And finally they were out of gas and they're going to the airplane to put the airplane down with the gear unlocked. I could see it was just short. I'm flying formation. I could see it was just short of going over center. And he said, we've got to land. He said, we got to, we can't. And the fear was they were going to land and then the gear would slowly collapse and the airplane would go down on the wing. It wasn't going to be catastrophic. I landed and I got Basler turbo conversions on. I had a Bluetooth, got them on the phone. I'm talking to Basler. They had people in their conference room. They're talking to this guy. Nobody could figure out what the problem was. I landed, the airplane's on the way to the airport to land, the gear locked, okay? I landed, got out of the seat and was walking to the door of the airplane, and again, 0 altitude, 0 airspeed, I knew what the problem was. But I'm sitting in the seat, flying formation in the middle of the battle and couldn't figure it out. And what it was a piece of red rag in the return line that was seeping oil on the return side that finally seeped enough to let the gear lock. And if they'd have tried recycling the gear, we made the decision not to recycle the gear because we saw the gear was going down. If we'd have recycled the gear, we might have reset that problem. We also might have blown the red rag out of there and it might have come down just fine. But because it was slowly going down, we decided to wait it out, and it worked.
The other thing I learned through this, and I encourage people, when you work through this process, don't be afraid to back up to the last step, and that's what I didn't do. I thought to myself, I got to a fork in the road. Do I call Doug? I've called Doug for some pretty insignificant help before, right? So I'm not afraid to call Doug. I talk to him once a week. I know he's helped people through gear problems. So I had this fork. Do I call Doug or do I call ABS? And I thought, well, I know the airplane pretty well. I'm going to go to the experts. I'm going to call ABS. But then when we got to a stopping point with them and they said, you've done everything you can, it's very easy just to back up and go back to that previous fork and say, okay, now I'll call Doug. I didn't. So I think that is what I really took away from that. Even though I was sitting on the ground, when the fire trucks started rolling out, things started happening. Same thing too, my voice started to change. I'm going to see a beautiful airplane on the runway. I also have a couple of fuel trucks full of fuel that aren't going to be very busy if Martin's blocking the runway. So I'm pretty connected to it too, right? And I think that's another thing, is don't hesitate to go backwards and rethink the last step. Might lead you down a different road. And fortunately, my better half was often makes better decisions than I do, so she called Doug. So she will tell you she called him to ask him to pray, but I think she knew what she was doing.
Is there anything you could have done as far as pre-flight that could have forewarned you that this was going to happen?
Well, I mean, the one thing was what you said was checking the free play at the end of the travel. Yes. Making sure you have a half a turn or an eighth of a turn or whatever the spec is. Like I said, I wrote that down. I'm going to go home and check that on my airplane.
The theory is that nothing changes if nothing changes.
Right.
So if you have typically in your airplane you have an eighth to a quarter or whatever your situation is, and all of a sudden 2 months later you go check it and it's different. It's time to say, let's look and see what's happened.
So that goes back to the gearhead thing. I've got thousands of hours in old airplanes, and all airplanes talk, old airplanes especially talk, big round engines have a whole language of their own. And, I've come to know that language, and we got a Mustang right now that we put a new engine in it this winter, and that airplane has not been happy since we put that new engine in. And we brought the engine rebuilder, flew in from California to look at it, and he said, no, everything's fine. And that engine's not been happy since we put it in there. And 2 days ago, we were fooling with the airplane, and the light went on for me. I need to run this thing at night. Last night, we ran it at night, and the A3 cylinder on the left mag doesn't have any fire coming out of it. It meets the mag spec, all of that. Okay, the airplane's been talking to us for, we probably got 75 hours on it now. It's been talking, 50, but it's been talking to us since the get-go. We either have a bad spark plug, but we changed the spark plugs. It's hard to believe. Could be. I mean, it's got automotive plugs in it, and, we all know quality control's gone downhill. But this airplane's been talking to me, and finally the light went on how to check it beyond just a mag check, because it met the mag check, but it was kind of right at the borderline of 100 RPMs. Well, it's got a dead cylinder on one mag, and at 50 inches of manifold pressure, one spark plug is not a good thing. We're going to get to the bottom of it, either a new spark plug or a new wire.
There you have it, right? If you suspect your engine is broken, fly it at night.
I didn't fly it, I ran.
Martin, did you think about going to a bigger airport, the 139 airport that would have a fire department, not your volunteer firemen? Because I'm thinking this through at my little home 3,000-foot runway airport going up to Northeast Philly, Allentown, Trenton. I know the plane's going to be down for a year if I do this. What was your thought process? I don't know what I would do.
I'd go to where I can get it fixed.
And we talked about that. I told Martin right away, I said, you are welcome to come here, but you don't have to. But I think ours was probably a good mix of, it was a volunteer fire department. Those guys were ready. In fact, when he taxied in, I was like, hey, everybody, the axe thing, we're not doing that anymore, right? We're talking about where to access him if he was trapped or something. So, but it was a 5,000-foot runway. We didn't have the ability to foam. But yeah, from our standpoint, again, Martin did consider that.
I'm thinking the Fistos up at Allentown. I'm not going there.
Yeah, maybe for a different kind of problem where there was a higher probability of a really bad outcome on landing, I would have considered that. But this was more like, okay, the plane's going to be damaged. I will not get hurt in all likelihood. And Pella and Shane's shop seemed like a good choice to put it down to have it repaired then there.
I think we left you hanging for a while over here. So.
Yeah, just a thought that came up to me. When you were talking about you made a decision to land, you're in the process, and you felt your phone buzz, and you took a look at it. I think that follows in. My first thought is, I've dedicated, I'm coming in, I'm in this process, I'm not going to look at my phone right now. Going to do not give up. Come back out of it, let's see what's on this phone, which you did. I can see that going the other way. Now I'm not doing anything now. I think that was a great choice.
Yeah, so it's a good point, right? We have a wonderful communications tool at our disposal, but it's also a source of distraction. This I was still at considerable altitude. You remember this all had started at 11,500 feet. I was trying to use my gear as a drag producer to increase the rate of descent at a reasonable speed, not close to the maximum gear extension speed. So I was not in the pattern yet when that happened, and also. I had just been using this phone to deal with this situation, right? So my first thought was, well, this is probably the same conversation thread that we had been going. Let me take a look, because it could be important for what's to come.
That's my thought on it is, even if you were like coming down in, you felt it, you're in a position not to look at it, but well, let's go around, I've got the time, let's go up and see if there's something else there, since you had all the time to do it. So.
Yeah, now honestly, if it had happened on short final or in the flare, I probably would have continued with the approach, but timing was good, and a lot of factors in this whole thing were.
It was raining. It was raining. I could have just as well been flying,
Yeah.
Megan called.
A lot of things are probably attributed to luck, right? It was a nice VFR day. could have happened at night. Everything's harder at night when you can't see well. It happened during a weekday when the ABS office was open. It was raining where Doug was, so he was on his phone and not flying. And yeah, so many little factors that help bring this to a good end.
Did you buy a lottery ticket when you left?
No, I did not buy a lottery ticket. Lance.
So, two emotional questions for you. One, did the thought ever cross your mind while you were dealing with this? Damn, I just put a bunch of money into the panel.
No, I wasn't worried about the panel. I was worried about the cost and the time that it would take to repair, right? We all know how scarce parts are, propellers, engines, very, very long lead times, right? So that probably could have meant being without an airplane for about a year.
Then my other question is, in your emotional state, how did the landing go? Was it your best landing or your worst one?
What would you say?
I thought it looked okay. Yeah, I think it looked okay. Yeah, I think it looked pretty good. No video though. I don't. Well, my wife might have a video of that actually.
I think there is a video of it. Yeah. Jake.
So, statistically, somebody in this room will land gear up. One resource that hadn't been discussed here is thinking about what to do next. On the ABS website, there's a marvelous 2-page article called Avoiding Further Damage. It's probably much more important than thinking about what airport you're going to land in. I have seen a Baron destroyed after a gear-up landing by guys at the airport who didn't know what they were doing, or a pilot who didn't know enough. Read that. It's called Gear Up, Avoiding Further Damage. It's on the ABS website.
Really good point.
I picked up a Mustang. The airport was coming with a forklift to lift a Mustang off the runway. And I went, whoa, stop. Well, we got an airliner coming in. I don't care. We got a mobile crane and we picked a Mustang up off the ground and with no further damage. Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Kind of an unstated thing that you did is your Bluetooth headset was connected to your phone, right? How do you talk it? In other words, it seems like a good thing to remember if you ever need to use your phone is it better be connected to your headset because it's pretty darn hard to hear anything.
This is the single most valuable single pilot resource tool we have in the airplane these days. It's a flashlight, it's a GPS, it's a communicator. I mean, if you were by yourself and you get, down below 2,500 AGL, usually you can get web service. You could go look something up on the internet. There's a lot of technical resources. Yes, Bluetooth to talk to somebody. I've called maintenance shops. I was flying a Corsair with Bluetooth, and it's quiet enough you could hear. And P40 had a gear problem, and we called the maintenance shop, and we got it resolved. This is a really, really valuable tool in the airplane. And yes, it can be a distraction, but that's the discipline of how you use it.
And you make a good point, though. I did not have my headset connected to the phone. It was a text conversation only. But you're right. It would have been possibly useful to also speak in voice. And the ability to communicate is just getting easier and easier, right? Many of us now have a Starlink Mini in our planes, so it's no longer a matter of luck whether you are or are not in an area where you can use your cell phone. Without that, text messages are probably much easier than voice calls unless you're very low. But with the Starlink, you could be at 15,000 feet and still make Wi-Fi assisted voice calls.
But the Bluetooth could have saved your knuckles.
Yes.
I just want to add real quick to the point that John made back here about avoiding damage to the aircraft if you're in that situation. And I can envision, you got the airport management pushing you to get this aircraft off the runway. And a couple of things that you might keep in mind, you're trying to get it picked up from an overhead crane as opposed to a fork truck. And they've always got fork trucks, but they don't have these overhead cranes. But if you can get them to slow down just a little bit, even in these smaller rural towns, if there's a monument dealership there, they've got these cranes. They used to set these monuments at, they usually pick up an aircraft or one of these big wreckers that they haul, go pick up semis with, have this crane, and those are all over the country. You can get one there pretty quick, so you don't necessarily have to get pressured in and tearing it up.
Yeah, good point. And by the way, you're looking at the airport manager right here. So that
I am too. Yeah, I'm an airport manager.
But when the question was asked earlier, did you consider going to a bigger airport, maybe with better emergency services? Des Moines is not far away, right? But imagine me blocking a runway in Des Moines. Now they have a lot of pressure to reopen that runway. Because they have scheduled airline service, and I think that made Pella a better choice in this case.
These guys have the straps too. You need the 2 straps.
And you're not getting it fixed in Des Moines.
I couldn't afford to. Yes?
My first thought was to see if you had enough gas to get down to Biggs aircraft in Oklahoma, where you could land on their grass strip and they could fix it right there. So,
grass is not usually the best option. The coefficient of friction between pavement and aluminum is lower than the coefficient of friction between grass and aluminum. Everybody thinks if I have a problem, I want to land on the grass, and that's almost always the wrong answer.
To me, what's interesting is people talk about use all the tools in your toolbox, which is kind of like a cliche, but in this instance, it's very interesting because one of those tools in your toolbox was chatting to someone else, and that allowed you the opportunity for them to tap into their toolbox. So you had ABS on the phone, you had Doug going through his knowledge, so you had other people kind of working for you at 0 AGL and 0 airspeed, being in a probably better state of mind because they didn't have helmet fire, or at least not as much. So that obviously that's what led to the fix. But just kind of take it. And another toolbox was the fact that you had fuel, that it was good weather, so you were not in a rush to say I have to land now.
Absolutely.
Pose a comment. They didn't hear comment.
Utilizing all the tools in your toolbox and reaching out as far as you can.
Yes?
Yeah, this is from Sean. Ed Waters said to say hello and wondered what you were doing at an ABS event.
Yeah, from a serious friend. So somebody asked me how I got here. I said general aviation.
The Bonanza folks.
Say again?
Maybe you're just here to sell Sierra's airplane.
They have a lot of people better than me to sell their airplanes, so I don't need to do that.
All right. One last question, Nick.
This goes to the prior segment, and you may have touched on this, I don't recall, but is there a replacement interval or recommended replacement interval for the dynamic for that?
Question is about, is there a recommended replacement interval for that relay?
I'm not sure. I'd have to look that up. I don't know off the top of my head. The relay itself versus the actuator.
Martin, don't bury the lead. I've been sitting here for an hour. How the new mag work?
The new mag has been working great, but I have not yet repeated this experiment to compare between fixed timing and advanced timing. We still have to do that at some point, and yeah, we'll do it at some point. Thank you all very much.
One quick thing, I think you guys talked about the in-flight check, the in-flight gear check. Somebody I think mentioned it. It is on the ABS website. If you guys want to find it, it's under aircraft technical information. Then you choose your model, and then you will find it there, landing gear transmission in-flight check list. It's on the website. But thank you very much, speakers. You can also rate this session on the app and provide us any feedback. Thanks.